carries well enough. You could have one microphone in here and hear me. So, what do we got going on? Oh, I guess I need a drop box. Well, okay.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the City Council workshop on April 8th, 2019. First item on the agenda is public input. Citizens may address the council regarding any item of city business that's not on tonight's agenda. The duration for an individual speaking under public input is 3 minutes. And while comments are welcome, the council will not take any action on any item that's not on the agenda. So is there anybody that would like to come forward with anything that's not on tonight's agenda to address the council with? Not.
Am I on the agenda?
You are.
Oh, maybe I'll have
We got you covered. All right. Moving on to our general items. Under executive review, the first item we have is a resolution, and this is a resolution approving a task order authorizing Cowdermus, Lee, and Jackson Incorporated for work relating to the city's 2019 pavement damage repair project. And I have both Kurt and Carl Jackson, if needed, to speak to the council on that.
Good evening, Mayor, council members. Unfortunately, we had a lot of damage this winter. You can drive almost any city street in town. You'll see some very bad areas that we've barricaded. We've expended almost all of our barricades out trying to block off some of these streets. Our guys did go out this spring and start ripping up some of the asphalt, putting in pit run, and getting those street repairs done. We came to the conclusion that it was just overwhelming and we can't get it all done. So we'd like Lee and Jackson to prepare bid specs and go out and bid. Go out to bid to a contractor to come in and help us get those repairs done, get the needed sub base put in there, and then some pavement over top of it. So we're asking, we asked KLJ to prepare a proposal. We also worked with them to find out how much damage we may have out there, and they came up with an estimate just shy of $400,000, or right about $400,000. And so anything over $80,000 in repairs, we need to go out to bid for that. And so that's why we're asking the council tonight to consider that. Having a task force with KLJ to do that. We also did bring this to the Public Works Committee last week, and we discussed this, and believe everybody was in favor of getting these repairs done. So,
Are there any questions for either Kurt or Carl Jackson on that? I'd like to, Council Vice President McGee.
Yes, sir. So, how many of these streets are scheduled for ultimate replacement and repair? And we're going to obviously go more than just surface deep in these repairs, and so it doesn't come up again next winter, right, Kurt? So
yeah, in these areas. Last year we had in front of a church over on West 4th Street, and we had also on 2nd. We did West 2nd ourselves, and then we had the contractor come in and pave that. We had to go out and do a bunch of other work on 2-block section of West 4th Street because of the repairs, and I believe it was a heavy load truck that went over there when it was soft. Frost was coming out and just destroyed it. And so this winter we had it pop up everywhere. It's popped up in the county, on county roads. It's popped up everywhere in that February frost come out. So we're looking at trying to.
So what I'm wondering is are we going to get entire blocks replaced, and that's going to be good for a while? You know, because there was some heavy damage over by the park and at Kiwanis Park, and I guess I'm just saying, what's the biggest bang for our $400,000 buck? You know, are we going to have entire blocks replaced? It's going to be good enough. It's going to hold up. Are we just going to do sections? And then eventually when those streets have to be ultimately fully repaired, those sections are going to go away. We're going to lose what we did, but maybe that's 20 years from now. I don't know.
Well, right now I'm just trying to get them back into a safe condition so that we're not having people in cars bottoming out. So that's the main goal for us right now, is to get them in a repairable condition so that they're actually drivable again. They're safe. And so that's what we're looking at. So realistically, we don't have enough money in the budget to keep doing full street replacement based off the damage. So what we're trying to do is do a balance of how much you can do in this area, but when it popped up all over town, we have to go hit so many spaces that if we did just focus like we did last year, we just did 2 blocks,
Yeah,
and that's all we did.
right.
There
Then
was
you
other
can- then you-
spaces all over town. Well, we didn't get to those because we spent the money over there. So knowing that we wanted a project coming up, we were trying to save some money so we could do a large project. And so we did that, and we think, talking to Bethany, that we could go forward with doing the repairs and our large project and still have some money in there.
Okay,
And so that's what we're trying to do.
okay, all right,
It would be
thanks.
still the council's preview if we do this and get the bids coming in, you still have a second crack at this and sit there and say, we can either accept those bids or not accept those bids, depending on what those repair costs will be. Ultimately, the contractors will decide that. So we do have a contractor in town that's already gonna be doing East Sixth Street, and they are very interested while they're in town that they could bid this project and go out and do the, hopefully, if it doesn't affect their contract days, then they had something for people to do, they could go over and hit some of these areas as well. But that will only be done if we go out to bid.
Okay, all right.
Did I get that right, Carl?
Kurt, can we put the streets in perspective just briefly in a matter of like 3 minutes? About what year were those SIDs originally created? Over what period of
Yeah.
time? Basically, just,
So essentially, how the city, it came from downtown area and it went north. Most of the city streets. The south side was the part of the original town. So the south side developed very rapidly. That's why you have the narrow streets, because you had narrow cars back then. You had
what time area was it?
Early 1900s. From the pictures I've seen, there wasn't much on the south side in like 1908. Mostly it was above the tracks, and there was very few houses, but it was scattered from all the way from Alder Avenue of houses out there. Nutting Brothers subdivisions. That was essentially Alder Avenue down. So the town sites of Nutting Brothers, that was in 1908. Second phase Nutting Brothers was 1940, and that was Maryland and out by Sid's. That was second phase. And then third phase Nutting Brothers was actually down over by, I believe, the rail yard where the old roundhouse is. That was third phase of Nutting Brothers. So
So if those
LA
residents wanted streets, wanted pavement,
So,
they,
yes.
the city created an SID where those costs were amortized over that block, 5 block, whatever area that was, and those property owners paid for that, correct?
That's correct. What happened is when we went in, the city grew, they were, curb gutter and sidewalk was installed, but our streets were largely dirt. And that we would have an oiling, they called it an oiling contract every year. We'd contract for oiling the streets to keep the dirt down. And that's from your previous council minutes, it's called the annual oiling. So you go oil the dirt, keep the dust down, but they were dirt. And then when they went in and paved, they paved the driving lanes, and then they didn't do much with the parking lanes. That was gravel or triple shot is what it essentially was. So they lay down about an inch over that dirt, very little gravel underneath it to level it. So every time we have a water break or every time we have these problems, we go over there and there's literally about an inch and a half of asphalt, and it's right on the dirt.
And that was done because that was what was affordable at the time.
It was affordable at the time. And if you get a slope, so soil will get compacted, and if you keep it at optimum moisture content, you can drive on it. But back then, when they did these streets, the loads weren't as high. You didn't have these big concrete trucks. They were smaller concrete trucks. They didn't have as much pounds per square inch on the tires. So now we're having people that, if they want to do a sidewalk job in their front yard, driving these concrete trucks up our streets is just destroying them. I mean, it's just because the base isn't there. So when we come in and we look at it, I've got numerous pictures of every time we have a water break. I'm real good about it. On the south side, we had a water break, and literally there's asphalt paved right on the dirt. There is no gravel under there. And I come from, I spent 4 years at an engineering firm that we dealt with the soils and gravels. And in order to have an asphalt section, the asphalt is plastic. That means it can be molded, and that's what concrete is, plastic when it's being formed. The load is actually held by the gravel section below it. And below that, you have your subgrade. So if you're on soft subgrade, which we expect to be on East 6th Street, we have to design for that. So we're putting in geogrid. And back in the day when these streets were built, they didn't have all those. They didn't have geogrid. They didn't have fabric that they could restrain that stuff. And so we're trying to fix and make an equal balance there. What do you want to do on these streets? Do you want to sit there and spend all your money on doing crack sealing and chip sealing on streets that you cannot literally fix because they don't have the proper foundation? We'd like to go in, and that's why we're doing these big projects, put in the proper foundation, deal with the high groundwater, deal with the mud, and build your streets right.
In my travels this spring, I've seen 3 newspapers in smaller communities around Glendive for one, Havre, where they had the same issue this winter. It got so cold and the frost went so deep, and then when it started coming out, that moisture, and then the traffic they have streets that just came apart. We're not alone in this, so, but.
Yeah, in Roundup, Red Lodge, Big Timber, the actual water lines were freezing in those communities. I think we only had one service that actually froze, but I did get calls from Big Timber and Roundup that their water lines were frozen. In fact, Roundup's Public Works Director called me and asked us if we actually go out and unthaw the service lines, and I said we don't do that. He goes, well, either do we, but he was calling around to check because that's what he was telling their citizens, that they're not responsible for that. So he also said in the old days you could get by with throwing a welder onto your copper line and turning the welder on, and it would unthaw your lines. Those days are done and gone because you might burn the house down. So
Butte, Anaconda, and Helena had the same issue. I was just talking to a gentleman just a month ago about the same problems they had in Butte, or excuse me, Helena, this winter too, with the service lines freezing, coming into people's homes. So.
And so the special improvement districts did go in there and pave those streets. Like I said, they didn't put proper base materials in there, and even if they did put a little bit of gravel in there, over the time and the years of that frost in and out every winter, those gravels just got absorbed into it. And then you start getting some cracking and alligator cracking. If you didn't properly go in there and seal it, water gets in there and makes the subgrade even worse. It gets over optimum moisture content, and your base just gets destroyed. So new construction, if you have a crack and you get water down in there and you've got the base gravels underneath there, you won't have a problem with the mud. So.
Any other questions for Kurt on the pavement maintenance? Seeing none, we'll move on to item number 2 under executive review, which we'll leave Kurt up there and Carl in reserve. This is resolution approving an amendment to task order authorizing Cadamus, Lee, and Jackson Incorporated for work relating to the city's East 6th Street reconstruction project.
And again, this resolution is typical, like all the resolutions. We hire an engineering firm to go out there and do a design. And then once the design has been thoroughly vetted, we come back in and we ask them to do a bid document. So design bid documents. Once we get through the bid process, then we follow up with another task order or the amendment to the task order to allow KLJ to do the design on-site construction, administration of that, and then prepare, like in this case on East 6th Street, we have water lines that'll need as-built. We also need the street profiles to be certified, so they'll have a, they call it an RPR, residential project representative. There you go. And so they come on site every day and make sure the contractor is meeting the grade elevations, the staking, bringing in the sections of gravel, and then we're going to be looking at making sure the subgrade is compacted. Subgrade. The gravel sections are being compacted and meet that, and then we're going to do the paving. So this resolution is allowing KLJ to come in and do the construction portion of this. And this will be the last part of that East 6th Street that you will see coming from KLJ on that. So.
Are there any questions on that project on East 6th Street? I know we've been through it a few times. Any questions at all on the project? They're going to make every bit of accommodation they can during the middle of that construction phase for the 4th of July celebration. There'll be a lot of traffic out there. They've looked at some different things that they want to do to address that, allow for traffic to move freely across East 6th. The construction will be down for that period of time from, I think, Wednesday of that week on to allow for the setup for the fireworks and then the breakdown and removal of the porta potties and all of the equipment that the Fire Association has up there as well. So they're confident that it'll go smooth, and although it'll be a slight disruption, it won't hinder everybody's ability to enjoy that. So for those people that come down to
We do have a class reunion happening on the Saturday. And so I talked to the contractor last week about that, and we're gonna have that shut down. Their class reunion is gonna be on Saturday after the 4th. And so we'll make sure that there's accommodations for people to get in and out of there for the class reunion. It's not only for the 4th, but for the class reunion. We did offer the class reunion to go over to Lions. It was open over there for that date, and they came in and met with me and said, no, we still want the Thompson Park shelter. So they understand that the parking may be limited, so they'll have to park over by the pool, and they'll have to park up on East 8th Street and then get down there. But if anybody needs some accommodations, I told them we'd work on that, make sure the contractor's aware. So if somebody's desperately needing to get in there, we could probably open up the barricades for that and allow a vehicle to get in there if it's in shape, so they could drop people off that need to have some accommodations. So we're trying to do everything we can on that. They are going to work from last week's meeting. They're going to work from Wyoming and then head towards First. They are going to drive in on the current asphalt. They're going to excavate, and what they said is try to do it daily. So they're excavate out, lay fabric, lay gravel, and be out of there every day so that they don't have an open trench, so that if we have a rainstorm or something that they don't have that subgrade there exposed to having a bunch of water in it that they'd have to come in and pump out, trying to get compaction. So they're going to work their way from Wyoming backwards. Of course, before they can do that, they have to do the water line from Pennsylvania over to Wyoming. So that'll be the first part of the project. They'll go in there and get the water line installed, and then the contract will come in after that and then start working the street back. And we anticipate it being done in early August and back open for school, so that we don't have to deal with construction in school and buses and parents and make everybody happy.
Any questions on that project? Seeing none, we will move on to the next item. Number 4 under executive review is a resolution. This is a resolution relating to the Special Improvement District. This is number 3. Is a resolution approving an amendment to task order authorizing Cadamus, Lee, and Jackson Incorporated for work relating to the city's East Downtown Infrastructure Improvements Project. And we have Carl, we have Nick is available, and Bethany as well, because there may be some questions. And I wanted to make sure we had all the staff here that could answer any perceived questions that I thought you might have as a body. So we'll start with Carl Jackson.
Okay. Thanks, Mayor and council members. So I'll just give a quick project overview and then turn it over to Nick. So this is the project we began preliminary engineering last fall. It's so far today we've done all of the survey, the preliminary engineering. We've looked at stormwater management. We did the geotechnical investigation. Basically, all of the preliminary work it takes to move into final design. And so this amendment is to go from that preliminary engineering stage to the final design for this area. And the project area is basically Washington to Ohio, inclusive, between Main and First. And then there's a couple little ancillary, half blocks here and there around First, where we're going a little bit north and up the triangle there, wherever it comes in around Washington, I think, or Idaho. So between those blocks, we're looking at water main, sanitary sewer, storm drain improvements, paving, curb gutter, sidewalks, kind of the works for rebuilding that infrastructure down there. So this amendment is for design of the whole thing, but it's only for construction of what we could get finished this year. So we're gonna design the whole thing, but only do a bid package for phase 1 of construction, because we're anticipating not all of it can be built in 1 year. So we'll get one project finished this fall, and then come back around with another bid package to finish it next year. That's the general overview. I'd be glad to answer questions, specifics, or turn it over to Nick here.
I'm going to go have Nick present, and then after that may stimulate some questions, and then we can come back to Carl or Nick and or Bethany, whoever may need to answer those questions. So,
Of course.
Nick?
Mr. Mayor, it's a pleasure, city councilors. I just wanted to say after, I've taken a tour of the area where the project will take place. I reviewed the scope of work. I reviewed, the budget with Bethany and talked over, what's going to be done, how we're going to go about doing it. And I view it as really necessary, especially after taking the tour last week with KLJ and with Kurt. Just rebuilding those streets, it's a great need. I was kind of surprised that there was streets with that kind of quality that hadn't been dealt with in the past, at least in some capacity. And, after reviewing especially the TIF district and the resolutions that had acquired it, two of the main reasons why the TIF district was established was to help address flooding capacity issues, including storm drainage and things like that, and also streetscape improvements. And so those two things are the kind of completely central to this project and the scope of work of the project. And I see that this is kind of the perfect place to use these funds. It's really in need. And we have the money available, and I think it's a very worthwhile project to go through. And I think the TIF district is also just in general a really strong tool to address issues like this of problems with road paving and stormwater and streetscape improvements. So I think it's kind of spot on of us to deal with it in this way.
Any questions for Nick about those projects? And I don't know, has anybody been down there and looked at those streets? They're probably three of the worst streets we have in the TIF district. And those are business owners down there that are directly affected by the state that those streets are in. In some cases, we're looking at moving and removing part of the street so that we increase parking.
That's a major portion of it, is to help kind of reconfigure some of the sidewalks and the streetscape so that we can actually have more parking, especially
Taking out boulevard where a business doesn't need a boulevard and do not have the time to maintain and water and take care of the grass and trees and could utilize the parking. It's everybody, all those businesses that we've talked to, everybody is thrilled about the project and the prospect that that would help their business, help increase traffic, help provide a better spot for people to park. I think that project may have stemmed from the fact that we had complaints from people, especially on, I believe it's Idaho, on Washington, excuse me, where there was water puddling because there wasn't proper drainage, and there's just issues. There's different heights along the gutter, and there's no drainage, and this would certainly remove all of that, take care of it. Hopefully give us better drainage from what we get and we get a lot of water from up above us because of this natural slope and elevation. So that would help to keep that water where it belongs and moving so we get it into the drains, correct?
Yes, and that's kind of thinking through that. The project is about kind of optimizing, especially in regards to, like you had said, they don't want boulevards in certain areas and they can't maintain it. So optimizing it for their benefit and the city's benefit is kind of where this project lies. And after walking the project area, it definitely was apparent that we need to build in some consistency to how we develop and rehabilitate our streets and sidewalks. So.
Any other questions? Council Vice President McGee.
Yes, sir. So understanding there's a great need for this, and I'm totally on board for that. But some of this has experienced some of this damage through the winter, and obviously this project is going to be in phases. So are we going to have to repair some of that winter damage on the streets with our earlier resolution, and then come back and tear that up? So we're not going to do repairs for streets that are going to be replaced. That's not going to happen, right?
Those are all over here.
Okay. Well, some of that was damaged too. I know. I drive it every day, and but I mean, So, but what you're telling me then is that none of the repairs that will be done to bring, as Kurt said, our streets back up to safe standards is going to be performed in this area. That's all going to get this reworking. Okay, appreciate that.
Correct. That TIF district will expire in just under 3 years if we don't do anything. The state allows us to bond a project and extend that another 25 years. So in doing that, that gives us the ability to pay the debt service on the bond for that project, and it allows the TIF to continue to administer their grants that they've been administering through the Laurel board. And that's important, and I think that's still important to carry that, keep that going as long as we can as well, because that's a great service for those businesses that want to dress up or add to or look at some of the other options that they have, including the large grant option that they have as well. Councilmember Closey.
Thank you. Is this construction going on at the same time as these 6?
Going to have a lot of things happening. And that's only part of it, like we said. It would be half of them. It would be phase 1 and then phase 2. There was other projects that had been brought forth over the years that the Laurel Group and the city administration have looked at. Some of those were the streetscape project, which was part of the Gateway project that was funded and paid for by Laurel, but that was that's a challenging project. That's First Avenue, and that's a state route, so that requires a lot of conferring with the state and getting them on board, and probably a bigger project than what really the district is able to take a bite of. And this is a project I think that is perfect for them as far as size, serviceable by the debt is serviceable by the TIF district, and still allows them to go forward with their grant program. And I think that it fits quite well, and it's part of that TIF district that seems to have been ignored. And Kurt could tell you that we had a water break at Ohio and East Main this winter, and when they dug that up to repair it, they found a myriad of different types of pipes that were coming together in that area, and valves that were purchased from Ace Hardware for homeowner gate valves that were buried in the ground and utilized it. And I'm sure the rest of that area is probably in no better shape. So that will, like I said, gives that street, gives it the same look that many of these other streets have. A nice street, be striped, we have good infrastructure under it, and it's affordable. Is there anybody, we do have someone from the TIF district that'd like to come up
I'm
and
down
just.
in the corner of East Main and I know or whatever. I was just gonna say that.
That's all right, they won't bite.
The whole project, would it be like the same one where they'd go through in districts or whatever, or go through in sections and be there for days, or like, would it be they tear it all up and then it'd store up for over a month, or like how would that project go? Or would that be? But I'm all for it. Like the little sidewalk that I got there hasn't been there for 20 years or better, I'm sure. I'd be for the improvements. I think the parking would help out businesses. And the streets there, I think, are, you could tell when you drive over them, like there's not any asphalt there or whatever. So,
Can I get your name and address for the record,
Chad
please?
Page, 701 East Main Street, Pelican Cafe.
Thank you. Kurt, do you want to?
During construction, we want to make sure that the businesses have their access. We don't want to put anyone out of business, but there will be some slight disruptions when you do any kind of construction projects. There's going to be some construction delays. We would ask for to maintain those accesses. Of course, you're not going to rip up Main Street. So most of the businesses do have frontage to Main Street. And so that street will stay open, and there'll be parking on Main Street on the south side and on the north side. But going into that, we'll make sure that our specifications for the contractor are to to do as little disruption as possible to those streets. But some of those streets, they have a 2-inch water line, like the mayor said, it had a 2-inch gate valve that you would buy at the hardware store, and that was buried in there, and then it had a valve riser over top of it. It would have served no good. They even have the valve riser. Besides, all they did is mark where that valve is. But in order to shut that valve off, we would have to go down there and we use a pipe wrench to shut it off. So we actually had to replace that one too, because it was leaking while we were doing the water break. It was leaking up over there on North Street right off of East First Street, and so we had 2 water breaks that week, and one of them was on Main Street, and it was leaking all the way up half a block up onto by the propane station at the Town and Country is where the water was coming out. We dug there first, no leak. We dug down on Main Street and we found it, and that goes from cast iron pipe to PVC pipe. From 10-inch, I think it's 10-inch cast iron to 10-inch PVC to 6-inch PVC up to 6-inch AC, asbestos concrete, and then down to a 2-inch poly coming down one of the streets. One of the streets over there that we're looking at has a 2-inch water line in it, and you don't put 2-inch water lines in streets anymore. So we have to have a minimum of 6 for fire flow, and we need the fire hydrants replaced in that area too. So we've got businesses down there that are protected, not with a 2-inch line. We don't have a fire hydrant on that line, but in that neighborhood, we'd like to make sure that there's some fire hydrants there to protect those businesses as well. We did replace the fire hydrant in front of the Pelican Cafe here a few years ago, and because the groundwater in that when the firemen, it was actually a house fire north of there, and when they went to turn off the fire hydrant, this valve stem broke. It just completely was corroded off. And so they broke the fire hydrant. We had to actually do a call out to shut that fire hydrant off at their valve versus the top nut. So tell the infrastructure in that neighborhood is old and it's in need of water line repairs. We did videotape. We got the council was gracious enough. We got our new video camera and we went down there and we started videoing all that. That was our first project to go in there and see what the sewer lines were like in that area, make sure how deep they were, what they were made out of, and we did find some deficiencies. We'd like to get those fixed as well while we're down there. And so that'll be part of possibly the first phase of that project is come in and do all that. Get those infrastructure improvements below grade done, water, sewer, putting in good fire hydrants, and then we'll do the streets and stuff later. And like I said, Chad's here tonight. He was informed of the project, and he informed me tonight that he started talking about this in 2015. So we're 4 years from his initial complaint, wanting more parking and dealing with the sidewalks down there. He was one of the initial people down there that he would like some help to improve his streetscape in order to get more parking and more business, more people coming to his business. So that was one of them. We also had the High Plains Brewery. I did talk to the A1 Glass shop place. They are in favor of improvements. They use the alley approaches that come in off the back, and those alley approaches are holding water now, and they have to drive through it to get into their shop. They bring that water in on their shop floor by coming down those alleys and having to drive through that water. So they're in support of it. And then I talked to Wes, who is the head guy over at Town and Country today. He's in support of it because over there at the propane fill station and all along there, the sidewalk, the concrete is all deteriorated. We also have some accessibility issues over there where they don't have proper parking right now. If you pull up there and park on a parking block, there isn't enough room between the building and the vehicles to get accessibility. It would be hard to get through there with a wheelchair. So we put a curb and gutter there and make as the engineer suggested, maybe a wider sidewalk there so that when cars pull up to an actual parking curb, there'd be enough room for the overhang of the bumper and then still have enough room for ADA and sidewalks. And I would just say, if you want to go drive down there, across from Town and Country, there's no ADA. There's not even concrete sidewalk that connects the 2 blocks. It's grass on one side. So on the west side of that block on Ohio, it's grass. There is no sidewalk. It continues east towards Alder. It just goes into grass, and that's not right. And then we also have crosswalks because that is kind of a diagonal. The city's streets on Main Street go follow the tracks, and then we got streets that kind of are at an angle. We got parks there over there that are little triangle pieces. And because of that, we have places where we can't cross the street. On Ohio, there is no intersection. It goes to an alley. And so we're looking at even doing crosswalk intersections over there. Where would you put them into? Because one goes into an alley approach that the big A-frame church is on, or I shouldn't say big. It's an A-frame church over there, but it's a very small church, but it's the A-frame over there. And if you were to go north on Ohio, on the town and countryside, you go into the alley approach. So you can't have a crosswalk there going into an alley approach. You would have to move that. So we're looking at, if the council agrees, we're looking at trying to solve that issue as well. So it's just not water and sewer. It doesn't just address the business owner's requirement for extra parking and stuff like that. It's fixing all that. Bring up the city to ADA standards, bring up sidewalk continuity so people can walk through there. It's all of that. Getting rid of puddles, alley approaches that are holding mosquito havens and all that. So we're talking about storm drainage to collect some of that. So Ma Bell's, if you drive by there, I'm sure on Sunday, Ma Bell's had water backed all the way up from the hailstorm that came through. And so by intersecting that with some storm drains, we would cut that off and not send all the water down to Ma Bell's. We'd capture some of that water prior to getting down there, get it underground. And so that's part of the design process, is what we've identified that we would like to see. So.
Council President.
Yes, thank you. Could I ask a question of Carl Jackson based on something that he had said?
What?
Could I ask a question of Carl Jackson based on something that he had said?
Yep.
I just wanted to clarify, you said that this was going to be in 2 phases. And so obviously the first phase is going to be infrastructure, water and sewer. And then, so then will the streets then be gravel then for the rest of that year until the second phase comes? No?
No, we'll make sure they pave whatever they dig up for utilities in the same year. And so the first phase most likely will be Pennsylvania, Idaho, and then hopefully Ohio. And then we'll leave First Avenue for next year. So, or for street for next year. So, but whatever the contractors are committing to for utility work this year, those streets will also get paved.
So it's a finished street, it's a oh wow, okay.
Yep.
Okay. Big changes.
And paving really is the weather limitation, and that's why we can't do it all this year. A lot of folks would like to dig utility trenches into the winter if they could, as long as the ground's not frozen. But the asphalt plants are just closed, early November.
Okay. All right, that was it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions on this project? Thank you, Carl. Moving on then, we'll go on to item number 4. Item number 4, which is resolution. This is a resolution relating to the Special Improvement District 119, creating a district for the purpose of undertaking certain local improvements and financing the cost thereof and incidental thereto through the issuance of Special Improvement District bonds secured by the city's Special Improvement District revolving fund, which would require a public hearing. And I will have the city clerk speak to you on the SID, which is for East 6th Street, by the way. So that is for those properties on the south side of East 6th that we would need to replace our sidewalks on.
Yep. So you already passed your resolution of intent to create the district. This is your resolution to actually create the district. So nothing's changed. It's just actually going forward with that creation. All of the letters have been sent out to all of the property owners, including ourselves, by certified mail. We have had no protest received yet. So this will come to you next week for creation. Once the district is created, we will go out with your approval to sell the bond, and we will be ready to go for doing the sidewalks with the construction of that entire street.
And that will complete that project at that time and bring those sidewalks into ADA compliance as well, which are
Yes.
heavily used for people getting to and from the park over there and school.
Yes, I did speak with superintendent of schools over there, and she was very happy about this project. So she was very excited for the kids that walk to school every day over there.
Any questions on the actual creating of the district through the public hearing? With that, we will move on to number 5. Number 5 is a resolution. This is a resolution of the City Council to amend the large grant request program pursuant to the recommendation of the Laurel Urban Renewal Agency. And I have both Bethany from a financial standpoint and Nick Altanoga, who helps the Lura project, to talk about this was actually pulled from the last workshop and asked to, or excuse me, it was pulled from a council meeting, I believe, and asked to come back to the workshop. And for more information on whether or not Lura could afford, I believe was more of a question of the affordability of increasing that large grant program from 100,000 to 225,000. And there was a question for more clarification. So with that, I will start with Bethany.
So, Council President Eaton, correct me if I'm wrong, but your question to Laura was, how is raising the amount of grants that are given out going to affect their ability to pay back their debt service when they take out a bond?
Essentially,
Or when
yes.
they sell a bond, right?
Yep.
Okay. So I did reach out to bond counsel because I know that TIF districts are looked at a little different than general fund as far as bonding capacity. And the way that they're looked at is more like an enterprise fund. Although they are tax-based revenue-wise, they're more looked at like an enterprise fund. And you were absolutely correct when you said that their revenue, tax-wise, is a little over 600,000. That is their revenue. Their cash balance is 1.6 million, but their tax revenue is a little over 600,000. It's 629. Now, when a bond is sold and a company typically looks at a TIF district for how much they can repay on their debt service, they like to see anywhere from 130% to 140% revenue to pay back the bond. So if they're going to take out about a $3 million loan, they're going to want to see about $295,000 of available revenue to pay back their annual debt service, because their annual debt service payments, if you're taking out $3 million at about 5% per annum for 25 years, your debt service payments every year are going to be about $210,500. So you're going to need just under $300,000 of free revenue. So if you have $225,000 set aside to use for your large grants, and you're bringing in, for their budget purposes, revenue-wise, they bring in a little over $700,000 budgeted. Last year's actual was 708. The year before that was 659. The year before that was 625. So if you take $225,000 for a large grant away from that, and $215,000 for a debt service payment, then the rest you have left over is for your technical assistance grants, your facade grants, any other expenditures that your TIF district is gonna have, which is not a whole lot of money left. So that is up to council. Because the project that they're looking at over here on the east side of town, the last estimate I got was 4.66 million to do all those streets. And if we use the 1.7 million in cash that they have set aside for this project, or 1.5, I think that's what we budgeted, 1.5, they're gonna have to take out roughly $3 million. They're gonna have to sell a bond for about $3 million to get that project done. That's what they're looking at. They're looking at bond payments or debt service payments for 25 years of about $215,000 a year. So I spoke with the mayor, and from strictly just a financial recommendation, I don't want to tie their hands with our large grant program. It's a wonderful program, and we don't want to. I agree that they should increase it because helping the community with these large grants is essential to the community. My recommendation would be maybe not to increase it by the amount they want now, maybe only increase it by 50,000 and then revisit it after the bond is sold and we know concrete numbers, what their debt service payments are gonna look like, and then revisit increasing the large grant project again and increase it at that time more.
Whose ultimate authority is it that the TIF district remains financially sound?
You're looking at the 8 people right here. It's tax money. And the 8 people right here are responsible for that tax money. They have the ultimate authority because they can either approve that resolution or deny that resolution. It's council.
Any council questions so far? Councilmember Sparks?
So besides the large grants, we do facade, signage, small grants,
Technical assistance.
technical assistance. How much was spent on those last year?
Last year. So last year, $26,511.31 was spent on technical assistance. And then the large grants and the facade grants are combined. And there was $109,222.19 spent on large and facade.
The sign grants?
Those are called facade.
Oh, those
I'm
are
sorry.
sign grants.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yes.
And that's it that we have, just the large grants, the technical and the facade.
Yes. And then this fiscal year, we have 24,978.75 in technical assistance grants, and then 106,150.38 in large and facade grants that have been paid out. So they do give out a lot of grants, which I don't want to stifle that whatsoever because and I'm happy they're getting all the applications because that means word's getting out. People are starting to use the program. I like it.
Yes. Yes, go
One
ahead.
more question. So the first number that you threw out was 629-ish thousand,
Mhm.
but then you said their budget is 708,000. So which number are we using for this?
So their total budget is 705, and that is because they get a portion of House Bill 124.
Okay.
House Bill 124, however, is it's an entitlement share. That entitlement share is something that they started back in 2001. And it was the state's idea that they would collect all of these little revenues, little taxes, and they would collect them all and then they would redistribute them. It was easier that way. This entitlement share has been attacked every time it goes up in front of legislature. They attacked it again this year. They wanted to take part of it away and give it to attorneys. Every year, Montana Leagues of Cities and Towns fights for it to keep it at the city level. They reduced it in 2016, they reduced it in 2018, and so that's kind of why I left it out of the equation, because my fear is that eventually somebody's going to get to it. It's not a safe source of revenue for them or for the city, so I fear that
So
one.
leaving that out, then that would leave the 629.
Yeah. Now the tax base is sound because it's our tax base.
When I asked my clerk treasurer to look into this, I asked her to look at the worst case scenario for their revenue stream, because we wanted to make sure that whatever we did and what we were looking at, what we proposed to council perhaps as maybe would be what I think would be a responsible move in increasing their large grant capacity for the short term. We wanted to make sure that it was sound and not relying on money that may not be there in the future because of a portion of that finally is withdrawn from the communities, including ours, through the TIF district from the legislature in the future biennium. So therefore, we left it out. If it stays in for another 10 years or 12 years, so be it. That's great. That's good for us. It's good for the TIF district. They will still work at trying to redistribute that where they can to business owners that apply for, need, and are qualified to be awarded money. So.
Yep. And I did ask the city planner. I met with him today, and I said if the large grant program is increased by a specific dollar amount, we sell a bond, and then we go back to the table and figure out, oh, we can increase it by another amount and take it to council, and council approves another dollar amount. Can you go back and, tell the next 3 people who applied for the grant that they can get more funding? So he was going to look into that and see if that could be a possibility as well. Because at the end of the day, it's up to you guys when and how those grant funds are increased or decreased.
Council President Eaton.
I would like clarification. Going back to some of the initial numbers that you were going on, you had said 629,000 in tax revenue, and then you said 1.6 total.
That's their cash balance.
Okay, so they've got money in reserve that they just haven't used, and they do not use it right now, even to pay their large grant, facade, et cetera,
They cannot, because they have only gotten approval from council to distribute $100,000 each fiscal year, and they cannot go over that.
And so, if the financing goes through for this East End project, and the TIF district is willing to help fund part of it and enter into a bondable project, we are asking for $105,000 down payment on that?
1.5 million.
1.5, yes, I'm sorry.
Now you sound like me at budget time. Yes, they will
Okay.
take 1.5 million out of their cash reserves
Okay.
and put it down on the project, and then they will sell a bond, a TIF bond, for the 3 million, and then they will make those annual debt service payments out of their
Incoming.
revenue.
Yeah, so
Councilmember Schwartz?
just to clarify, so they'll be taking 1.5 out of their 1.6 in reserves to
Mhm.
put down on this bond, so essentially wiping out their
Yes.
reserves.
Yes, and that is what they have been saving for.
Sure.
Councilmember Schwartz?
I'm not against raising this, I'm against raising this for this amount of money at this time. With these numbers, it doesn't seem much of a cushion if that debt service comes in higher than what we think it's going to. So I don't think that we should more than double their budget for the year at this time. I think if we want to increase it by a smaller amount, and then look at this after. I feel like right now we're putting the cart before the horse with this, and what I don't want to see happen is us increase this to a point where it is not sustainable in the long term with paying off such a large debt service for this. Does that make sense? Okay. So can we go back to the drawing board on this dollar amount? Like
Well,
what's
You could work that out tonight, or you could work it out through an amendment, and you could offer one or two amendments until council comes to an agreement next week. But it's ultimately your responsibility. You are the ones who control the TIF. The LURA group, our advisory board, that are essential for getting the word out to the businesses about the district, putting together those grant programs, getting the applications out and making people aware that they're available, going through those applications when they receive them, qualifying those people that apply for money, and then disseminating funds once those people are qualified out of the available funds that they have, unless, which the state requires, once any of those amounts go over $5,000, that's an amount where they want oversight from the council, because you are the ones that oversee the TIF. And at that point, it's your responsibility for oversight to make sure that the application was proper for the correct money that they were applying for, and that all of those procedures were followed correctly before then you can release that $5,000. So it is your responsibility to look at whether you would like to look at reducing that amount for a period of time until which that project has been bonded, those bonds are sold, and then our moving parts are fixed and we can look at where we're at. Typically, the district should always increase incrementally. That's why it's called a tax increment district, financing district, because the value continues. Council Vice President McGee knows this very well. Property values typically continue to increase over time. So it should always be providing itself with more funds as you move into the future. Especially, that's the great thing about having the opportunity to bond a project and extend it for another 25 years, because it breathes life into that and gives a lot more life and a lot more benefit, I think, in what you have. Hopefully is growth in your downtown area, and with that and the growth in that tax increment that comes into the TIF, it gives you the ability to continue to fund those interests that are going to continue to be looking to try to get some of that help, albeit it's a small amount of help typically on what they're spending for work that they're doing on their businesses, except maybe in the sign grant would be probably one where they're getting a greater return for a smaller investment. But, And I think there'll probably be room for you, a council, if not this body, but another council, years from now, to look at perhaps even increasing that large cap even more. Because there will be that financing that's funding that's coming in and seeing that availability for even more money above and beyond the debt service. And that is, hopefully, that is the goal, ultimate goal of any TIF district, as it is. Councilmember Herr.
If the TIF district were to expand to the west, which is expected in the next few years, I hope that would go into this fund, or would that be a separate TIF?
Once you draw a TIF district, it's drawn and set in stone. It can't be moved, expanded or contracted. It's there for the life of the district. You have to create a new TIF district, and that may very well happen to the west. And there's a lot of things you want to take into consideration that a TIF district can provide. A TIF district could even provide to build a fire department, let's say. So there's a lot of, when you create that district, you want to make sure that you take into consideration how you're drawing that boundary out and try to make the best use of it for the future that you can when you create it, because once it's created, it's done. So to answer your question, no and yes.
So the TIF district that we have right now, if we got new businesses or bigger businesses, that money would still go into this TIF district.
Mm-hmm. Council Vice President McGee, you had a question?
Yes, a couple different things I want people to be aware of, and that is that, and while it's kind of a shocking number to more than double a large grant request program, I'm not worried about it getting into financial trouble because that's what we have oversight of. There is no way, you could make it $1.5 million, who cares? You know, if the money's not there, it can't be spent, no matter who applies for it, you know, and whatnot. So, you know, if the Laurel board thinks this is a good idea, I'm kind of thinking they know what they're talking about. They look at this, it's the money that's generated by the business owners, many of them who are involved with the board, and yeah, it's kind of large. If it scares us a little bit, maybe we need to retract it some. But it's our oversight that will always keep this from getting in trouble, because no grant will ever be granted, unless I'm mistaken, unless we say so, you know, to spend that full $225,000 or $1 million or whatever we grant is that. So I'm not afraid of that. I will say, business is changing. Amazon is putting a lot of pressure on retail and the things that are incorporated with that. And while property values will always go up, provided that there's a demand for that property values can go down as well if something were to change in our culture that makes almost virtually no retail existent. We can't imagine a world like that because of what we've lived in for so long, but it's a great deal of pressure that's upon it. I just want you to know, you know. And so I'm not afraid of the number. If the council likes a little less number than that, I'm not afraid of that either. I just don't think we need to be worried about how that is going to be spent, because ultimately it can't be spent unless we say it can be spent. Just want that noted. Okay.
And I think the concern is to go through the motions of allowing applicants to apply for money that they believe is available after they've gone through the work because these are large grants, they've gone through the work, they've done a lot of work, and now they're hoping to recapture 15% of that or 10% of it with this grant, which is really going to help them out, and then find out now there's no money and that's what the good thing I think about is having a parameter there, so at least you know what that pool is that's available, and that you're going to get something based on that weighted concern of how big of projects were applied for and how many, and then with that there's a weighted percentage that's applied across the board to those. But that's entirely up to the body as well. Councilmember Stokes.
Is anybody from Laurel here tonight, or no?
The planner.
Does anybody know how much was applied for last year? That they ran out of money, or,
It was approximately, I think it was just slightly shy of $500,000.
okay, was that turned down because they didn't qualify or they didn't have the money?
That was just the large grant program. So they only had I think last year was still the $100,000. And so that's what they worked with at the time. So they kind of prorated all of the grant applicants that came in.
Okay, and it was the $500,000 that those people qualified for it, not the,
That was the full kind of, if even at the minimum, I believe that was what was applied for. Because a lot of the large grant, I think, is just a 50-50 match. And so they had a ton of applicants last year. So they gave out as much as they could to whoever they could. And I think that brings up a good point that in the future I can develop a actual list of performance measures that we can more stringently weight and kind of measure out the pros and cons of each project. Because as of now, we do a lot of discussion. We kind of go back and forth and say what might be best for the district, but we can also develop kind of an internal weighted performance system to actually give more oversight and accountability for how we're weighting the grants, how much money we're giving out, what we're looking at with that. So that's just kind of one of the options that I've been thinking through, especially with the chairman of the Laurel board, as so much more money is being applied for.
There was somebody over here, Councilmember Wilkie.
Yes, I would like to ask Bethany, based on what Councilman McGee said, are you still thinking that 50,000 increase would be the best way to go? Or based on what he's saying, that this body doesn't matter what that number is, you see where I'm going here? But can we be comfortable with making that large increase in that and hope that everything works out? I'm asking for your recommendation again, based on what he said.
I'm just gonna tell you from my fiscal standpoint, I would not jump to $225,000 because the TIF fund is not like general fund. The TIF cannot pull revenue from anywhere else. It cannot go over. It has no other cash account to pull from. If it goes negative, it's in trouble. It is stuck.
Mm-hmm.
Then I'm in agreement with Councilwoman Sparks that we need to pay attention to what our, shall I say, expert is telling us, that we should hold our parameters, and in the future, if we see that it can go up, we can move it up. But once you've done that, it might be real difficult to bring it back down to where it's manageable. So I would go highly on her recommendation.
And you can always, and I just threw out a number. If you want to go, it's up to you. If you want to do the full amount, it's entirely your authority. And I don't disagree with Councilman McGee. I fully agree with him. Amazon is definitely throttling a lot of our businesses. And if we could authorize every grant submission that we got, I wish we could. I have submitted several grants recently and only been approved for one. The grants out there are so competitive. I had my heart set on one and got denied, and they're just incredibly competitive. So it's just, sometimes it makes you sick. But that's kind of my fear, is if we go too high, how do we bring it back down? We can always go up. You can go up past 225 once we figure out what this debt service is going to be. And what you would do, correct me if I'm wrong, Mayor, is make a motion to amend that amount and then make a motion to approve it. But again, it's your authority. That's just my recommendation, but it's fully your authority.
And Councilmember Herr.
I do attend some of those meetings at the Laura, and in the past, anyway, I think I'm right.
a business place applies for a large grant and they want $200,000, but the board says, no, you can have 15,000. That's all we can give you. That's what they get. So if we got a $225,000 limit and somebody asks for 300,000, they're not gonna get it. They're gonna get whatever the board can divvy up between the 5 or 6 or 7 applicants. And they don't have to give the whole 225 away either. It's my understanding, I think. Is that right?
I mean, the Lure board kind of acts as the initial sounding board. So then we'll take in all the information, review the grants, and then we provide our recommendation to you guys that then finalize it and are the final approval
Those
mechanism.
large grants all come to council.
Yeah, and I think they have given away, I think they've recommended approval of all of the funds every year, I think.
Of the total 100,000.
I think so,
But
yeah,
like last year, I think they had $400,000 or $500,000 asked for.
right.
So each unit that asked only got a portion
Mhm.
of what they asked for.
Right.
We could service all of what is asked for, and they could give that in grants, and in 3 years, 2.5 years, Laurel will cease to, or the TIF district will cease to exist. So that is what is great about being able to extend the life of the district through bonding a project, which then the state gives you the ability to continue to carry that district out for another 25 years and continue to support those businesses while you're paying back your debt service on a large project within the TIF.
Yeah, and the debt service also, we don't know what interest rate we're gonna get. Interest rates right now are really wonky. We could get a great one. We have an amazing relationship with Yellowstone Bank. We could get surprised with the Board of Investments, or we could get a shockingly terrible one. And the payments annually could be a lot higher than we're anticipating. You never know what that's gonna look like as well.
Councilmember Motz here.
I've got a question for you. You said they'd be in real trouble if they came up with a negative figure. What would happen?
We would have to put a halt probably to any grant payments coming out until they got back into a positive cash amount. My auditors would ask me, what on earth did you do? If the auditors came in and they saw that their cash account was negative, they would put a halt to all spending except for debt service. Debt service would always be top priority, payroll, debt service, and then everything else would be, nothing else would go. So any grant programs, any spending would halt.
Thank you.
Council Vice President McGee.
But yes, Bethany, that would be because we approved funding in a grant or something like that, or multiple grants that ran that program out of money. We would have to be the ones that caused that problem because we
Ultimately,
approved.
it would be because I didn't advise you properly, honestly.
But we would have, what I'm saying is these grants cannot take place unless we agree that they take place ultimately. We certainly want the board to do their work and to come to the council with recommendation, but we're ultimately the ones who'd have to say, we spent that money, But we're also gonna always ask the question, can we afford it?
And I was gonna say, but
Yeah.
you look to me to.
Yeah, to tell us that we can afford it, exactly.
So like I said,
And that's my point.
I wouldn't have advised you properly
That's
if that happened.
my point. And I'm not trying to take issue with the council. The council wants to reduce this amount. I think obviously it needs to increase. I mean,
I agree with you.
even at $225,000, it doesn't match what was requested last year,
Yeah.
but couldn't be given away, and we can't maybe even do 225,000. I don't know, but so if the council doesn't like $225,000, then what does the council like? Does it like 175? Does it like 187.50? I mean, pick an amount. I don't care what it is. Just pick an amount, But I think obviously, from all indications, this does need to increase, So what's it going to increase to, fellas, ladies?
Councilmember Sparks.
So, a couple of things. Number one, I agree with what you're saying. Like, we obviously can't approve it if the money is not there. So I totally get that. Where I'm coming from is I think it is, I think it looks terrible if we're telling the businesses in that district, we have 225,000 a year that we can approve in large grants, and then we end up with, people applying for that, and then we're like, oh wait, just kidding, because we overspent that money. I think that's terrible. You want a number? I think 150,000 for the cap would be more than appropriate. The last time this was increased, we increased it by 25,000, so that's doubling what we increased it the last time. I think it's giving us enough of a cushion going forward while we're figuring out a debt service. And I think that then we can reevaluate this after we know what our debt service is gonna be.
Personally, I think it's a responsibility of the council to make sure that that fund is operating in the black and stays away from the red, but it's ultimately your decision, Council President Eaton.
And I would just like to say that this is new territory for all concerned. It's new territory for the TIF district and those people who are trying to service those grants. They are used to servicing their grants and not worrying about having to service a debt. So this is new for them. And I think that Councilmember Sparks came up with a wonderful number. It increases it, but yet it doesn't increase it to a level where the council is going to be uncomfortable, nor are we denying anyone an increase. And I totally agree, and I think that I said that 2 weeks ago, that it's a very popular program, it's a good program, and it's a good way to give this tax money back to the businesses and to those who have paid in. But I think that this council would be much more comfortable if we kept the level right now to a low number and revisited the issue perhaps at this time next year when we've got some numbers, we've got some facts and figures.
Councilmember Stokes.
Do you know how long it's gonna take to figure out what their debt service and everything could be? How far down the road is that gonna be?
As soon as we get bids in and council approves the bid
So is that
and awards the project,
3 months, 4 months, 5 months?
Kurt?
Soon.
Because I thought we were going this summer.
So possibly bidding the phase in 2 projects, we won't know where the oil prices and the markets are fluctuating. We may not know the second phase bid this coming this fall. So I would say we won't really know until we get the final bids for next spring. So if we try to go in and do some of this work this way, this winter, and get the paving done for the streets that go north and south, and then we wait for East First Street to go, we won't know those bid numbers until next spring. So the bond would be sold once the whole project would be completed. And so I'm thinking probably 6 to 9 months from now, we may know.
My concern was, I know you're talking about the banks, there's been a couple rate increases, so we could get a really, really bad rate.
But
which is gonna make a big difference.
we're gonna try and, we have talked with bond counsel about trying to work with, especially like I said, our relationship with Yellowstone Bank. There's a few things that we can do with this bond. So we've been talking with bond counsel on different types of bonds you can sell. So there's more to come on that. So we will see.
I'm even kind of like at 50,000 right now increase. I'm kind of like, I'm not even comfortable with that.
I'm comfortable with that. I think that's good. I think that's a good number. I'm not uncomfortable with that at all. And I don't know that we'll sell it to Yellowstone Bank. I can't tell you for sure, but I can tell you that with the amount of business that we do with them, They have always been incredible to the city. Always. They've always been very, very wonderful to work with.
We had our business owner from the district wanted to say something. Would you still like to say?
Answered all the questions, but I was just trying to question the amount or whatever, like if people apply for, but then he said 450,000 was the total or whatever, but then if they only give out 100 or whatever, then like what is it gonna be this year? Do you have figures on this year of what people are trying to apply for to where if there was a figure out there, like if it was $1 million, or would it be closer to be at 200? Or would that be 20%, or would that be a comparable of what people applied for last year on the percentage of what was paid out?
Currently, I think the large grant requests are around $225,000 or $230,000 that have been requested. So
So if it was 225, then it would be almost what they were trying to get right now,
Yeah.
or whatever, to improve the.
which is
work
kind
the
of just
city or whatever.
a major coincidence that
Yeah.
when I put the numbers together, but yeah.
But you'd think if they're applying for it and they're trying to beautify the city or redo businesses or make the city look good or bring everything up to code or make businesses more off to look at or whatever when they drive down Main Street, if that's what the fund was for, you think they'd be in more support of fixing up buildings or making other people that actually apply for the funds to go.
And that's kind of, I think, looking at the TIF district, there's both a great use of funds for business beautification and sidewalks and that, and then also managing it along with the major, like the streetscape that we were talking about and
If
doing
you
that
drive down-
stormwater and everything, so.
If you drive down the city, you can actually see everybody that, and you can tell in the TIF district
Yeah.
which ones are actually using that fund because it is beautifying the city, so I would think that
It's,
it would sound like it would be
it's-
better to go for it or whatever.
It's kind of a balancing act because there is such utility in both aspects, you know, signage and facades, and then also for the infrastructure repairs that also then boost property value and beautification. So it's kind of,
Then everybody's, if they do beautify the city, then their taxes would go up and then it would be a projectile of what it would be after that or whatever.
Yeah.
But that was all, they almost answered all of me also. That's all I needed.
That account very well could accrue enough money to even float another small bond 10 years from now for 10 years, or for 15 years. Would be 14 years at that point. You always have to be underneath that cap, whatever distance you have left. So there's always those opportunities should the TIF create enough money to do that. And or a small bond for a streetscape project of some sort, or perhaps the ability to buy a dilapidated building and put street level parking in or something. So there's always those opportunities, and that's what you always hope for, but you won't have that opportunity if you allow your TIF to expire. It will be gone. Are there any other questions on the increase, Council President Eaton?
So just because you brought it up, so say the TIF district doesn't, we don't help them by entering into this bond project. The TIF district expires. What happens to that money then?
It goes back to the taxing jurisdictions.
So it goes into the general fund?
No. So each jurisdiction associated with that TIF district that pays taxes into the TIF district, the cash balance associated with it, those taxes will go back to each jurisdiction. Like the school, it'll get its taxes back.
And what other entities then?
The school's the only one that I know of. I don't know which other taxing jurisdictions are associated with the TIF. I would have to look at its creation documents.
So then what, I mean, they're not gonna get $1.6 million back. So what happens to the rest of that? Is it lost then?
It goes back to whichever taxing jurisdictions are associated with that TIF district in a percentage.
No matter
So-
how much unfunded, unspent
Mhm.
funds are in the account.
When you say jurisdiction, are you saying, Joe's Pies and Meats pays in, and so they're a jurisdiction, and they would get their tax money back then? Is that what
Yes.
you're saying?
It would go back to them. And actually, per Montana code, the mayor has the authority at the end of the fiscal year that he can send back any unused taxes that the TIF does not spend to the taxing jurisdictions.
And so we've been building this up in anticipation of trying to extend the TIF district
And
so
do
that
this
it can
project.
continue to do these projects, even though they can't, they have never been able to fully fund anybody's project.
Mhm.
Yep, it's always been to create a reserve to do a large project in the TIF district. This has always been the talk ever since I was hired, that this was the plan, was to do a large project. And I fully support this project. I think it's a great project, especially for that area over there. Those streets are awful.
And the possibility of those streets being improved if TIF were not involved in this, would the city be able to help those streets then?
Oh, well, it's $4.66 million that I would have to find somewhere. Take it out of my paycheck? Oh, boy. I need a raise
Yeah.
She's the one bringing this
somewhere.
up.
I need another 5 jobs.
Well, I'm just playing devil's advocate. I mean,
To
everybody says.
answer your
what if,
question,
what if?
there-
Did you see my face?
Yes.
To answer your question, there's lots of streets that need work, and lots of those, most of those are outside of the business district and outside of the TIF. So this is the opportunity that you have to take care of those without having to expend your general fund, which is the only resource you have for your streets,
Yeah.
and then utilize those funds that you do have for your residential streets.
Mhm.
That, and Lord knows from our conversation earlier, when I wanted to give you a little background on the streets and what they were and how they came about to have payment on them, and why, that gives you the understanding of why many of them are in the disrepair that they are. We still have a great challenge in front of us to take care of those, so.
Mhm.
Kurt, did you have anything to offer or not?
No.
Okay. Is there any other questions on the increase of the large grant program for the Laurel board? Council President Eaton?
Yes, so have we come to some sort of an agreement then with regard to,
We can't make a decision tonight.
no, we need to, I believe the resolution is to amend the large grant request program. You said come up with an amount, she came up with an amount. Is that what we're going to enter into?
You're not making any decisions tonight because it's not a business meeting, but what you've done is debated this enough to where it'll be the responsibility of whoever it is that brings this forward as a motion during council discussion to offer an amendment to the motion to change that amount. And from there, it may have to go through 3 motions before you come to an agreement.
All right,
But that would be
Thank
the
you.
process.
that's,
so.
yes, that's what I was.
Good question. I've been wondering about that since they started. When we get down to the dollars.
And you've had a great debate about it, and I think that you can probably come to an agreement at the meeting next week and find something that you can all support. I'm sure of that. Any other questions on the large grant resolution?
See what you did?
Thank you very much. The next resolution I have is item number 6 is a resolution. This is a resolution of the City Council approving certain revisions to the CBA through a memorandum of agreement between the City of Laurel and local Union 303, American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, the AFSCME. And I have Clerk Treasurer Langby to discuss the financial implications of that and what we have found that will perhaps make that scheduling work right now with the union that has asked for that change. So I'll give that to Clerk Treasurer Langby.
Just real quick before we hop into this, I just want to say, especially to the president over here, I really appreciate you just asking the questions. All of you guys taking the time, digging in, asking the questions. That's your guys' job. So thank you for asking those questions, being the devil's advocate, because this is not your job. You're not the bobblehead. So thank you for starting that debate. That was a good one. I liked it. So this CBA is necessary because there was some verbiage that needed to be added. When they added a schedule, which is a 223 schedule for the police department, the way that the CBA works, it trumps everything. So the union agreement trumps wage and hour law, it trumps our personnel manual. It is the supreme document that we go by. There was certain language missing that caused the city to have to go by wage and hour law. And so we had to add a couple of things. We had to take this 223 rotation. It needed to be excluded from the standard work week because it's not a standard work week. So that language had to be added. And then we had to specifically state that the city was going to pay these officers anything over 80 hours overtime. Because in the 223 schedule, the officers were giving up their shift differential for overtime. So we had to add that language so it was crystal clear. Without that language, the city would have been forced to follow wage and hour, and it was not going to follow what the negotiation was between the city and the police officers union. So we just had to add the language to make sure that both sides got what was actually negotiated. Because now that it's in here, the city can follow the agreement. Because wage and hour has some weird stuff for officers and firefighters. They don't follow normal work weeks, and it's kind of weird and bizarre. So we had to make sure that we got it in here very clear. So that's what we did.
Are there any questions about the memorandum of understanding, making the changes? To allow for a change in scheduling that the union is interested in engaging in, with the understanding that they are fine with the change in the language so that they can engage in that, and it benefits both of us, actually, which is a rarity.
Because if anybody's worked with the union, if it's not in here, it doesn't exist, right? So we made sure it was in here. Huh, Jessica?
Yes.
We spent a lot of time, Bethany spent a lot of time going over it. We spent a lot of time with Sam and the representatives from the union, and we've all come to an agreement and got everything worked out that benefits all of us.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really going to benefit the police union. It's going to give them a little different approach to how they spend their time on and off shift, and I think it's going to be great for them. And I see a nod back there from our representation from the 303, so.
I'll just give you just a real quick example. Wage and hour law for police officers that we were not aware of. In a 14-day work week, the city does not pay overtime until they work 86 hours. That's not what we negotiated with them. We said anything over 80 hours is overtime. So because of that, we had to explicitly write that in here, so that the union was getting paid what we actually negotiated and not what wage and hour told the city this is what you had to pay. So the CBA trumps wage and hour, so we had to actually write it in here to make sure that it was crystal clear. The little things you learn.
Are there any questions for Bethany on the MOU?
Yeah,
Councilmember Wilkins.
I just now found this. I see a lot of deleted language here, so where's the corrected language, or is it?
Oh, do you want the weird one?
Corrected language is in red above what's been stricken.
All red except for that one.
I don't know if you have it.
Oh, honestly, I think that they have a totally deleted, crazy, bizarre version.
This, I mean, everything, almost half of the language that's in this is deleted.
But notice what's not stricken.
Huh?
Go through it, Urban, notice what's not stricken out. That's where the changes are in what there's not strike-throughs.
If you go down to
Where it says
page 4
formatted.
of the document,
I'm sorry?
page 4 of that individual document, with page 58 of the packet has the language right there. That very top line right there where it's not crossed out,
Yep.
that's the change.
Oh, okay. I'm gonna have to read this a little closer.
Because everything else is all.
Essentially, all we did, I can just tell you what we did. We added the 2-2-3 schedule, the rotation. It has to be excluded from the traditional 7-day work week.
Right.
Because they're working a different rotation other than 5 days on, 2 days off. So it has to be excluded. If it's not excluded, then it follows the normal 5 days on, 2 days off, and it does crazy things with overtime. It assumes that anything over 8 hours or anything over 5 days is overtime. So we have to exclude it for the city's protection. And then we added that verbiage I just spoke about, that the city will pay them anything over 80 hours.
Right, I saw that.
So that we pay them properly according to what we negotiated, that we'll pay them overtime over 80 hours to protect the union. So we had to add essentially those two things.
Okay.
And then they took out, what was the last thing you took out? The 6 and 3.
The work schedule, it says, all employees shall be scheduled to work on a regular work shift, and each work shift shall have a regular starting and quitting time, except in cases of emergency, when life or property are in imminent danger, and for the employee in the cover shift position on the 6-3 rotation. Right now, the officers work 6 days on, 3 days off, rotating. That language had to be removed. Because if you guys approve and we go to the 2-2-3 schedule, the 6 and 3 rotation, it's no longer valid.
So they struck
So
out
we
that
struck
6-3.
out that, the very end of that sentence.
Okay.
Because it's no longer valid.
Yeah, there's no point in that, just as for the city's and the union's protection for the officers. Dispatch won't go to that schedule. This is strictly only for the officers, because dispatch isn't exempt, so.
Has this been an issue to this point?
No, because they haven't tried the schedule,
Oh, okay,
because,
Yeah, it's brand new.
yeah.
okay.
And we were going through it and I was like, there's some things here that I think we need to look at first. So that's why we need the MOU before they even try the schedule, because there were some things that the city wasn't protected on, the union wasn't protected on, and that's why we need this language in here.
Okay, thank you.
And I remind the council that's part of the CBA which you approved. And in order for that you'd already approved, in order for this option to be able to be assumed, there had to be some changes made. Both parties agreed to make those changes by an MOU to make that part of the CBA for the 303 that you've already ratified. Council President Eaton.
I was just going to say, we just agreed to that, like the first part of this year.
Just about a month and a half ago.
Yes.
Any other questions on the MOU? Thank you very much. Moving on to the last item on the agenda under executive review is number 7, which is council issues, which is a handicap parking lot discussion, for which Councilmember Eaton showed me a wonderful picture that I think she got from Mr. Koch,
Yes.
and I think that went to everyone?
No.
No?
No. But it will, because I'm going
And I
to
don't know if
pass
we
it
can put that
around.
up on the screen, because you don't have it.
This, I can forward it later, but this picture to me says it all. You know, bless his heart, Mr. Koch has been in front of us trying to explain, and a picture is worth 1,000 words, and this picture to me says it all, because when you look at that and you visualize that parking lot being full, and then you visualize yourself trying to back out of your parking spot, that in itself is difficult enough, but then visualize yourself and 3 other people trying to back out of that parking lot, and I can understand immediately Mr. Koch's frustration. And to resolve it, getting down to the nitty-gritty of it, what he would like to do is extend that parking lot 8 to 10 feet into the park, and give all of the vehicles that are in there the physical ability to back out and turn so that they can exit and or enter that parking lot in a less than a crash car method. So that's what I wanted to bring forward to you. Yeah. And that's what I shared with the mayor last Tuesday. After this meeting, I sat and talked with Mr. Koch. I found out this, I found this picture, and then I went up there and I pasted it off. And 10 feet going out to this into the park to the south will butt up right against a power pole and the drip line, as it were, for the trees that were planted. There were 8 trees planted several years ago in honor of all of the council positions. And I don't know what the condition of those trees are. I did question whether or not those trees were alive or not, but I wanted to know the status on whether or not staff felt that we could extend that parking lot and not endanger that pole and not endanger those trees, and what a rough estimate of cost would be to extend that parking lot the 8 to 10 feet. And why I say 8 to 10 feet is because Mr. Koch was originally saying 10 feet. That's what I paced off. That's why it came right up to the pole. When I sent my my email summarizing everything that had been discussed and observed to the mayor, and I copied it to Mr. Koch, and and Mr. Cope responded that he would be willing to just have 8 feet. Just enough so that these vehicles can maneuver in this parking lot in a reasonable manner. And so that's what I was looking for with regard to answers from staff on those 2 issues.
Kurt, would you like to be the first?
The other staff left.
I'm all you got now, so. Part of me coming tonight, I didn't have all of your answers. I was on vacation last week, so from the time the emails were going out, I did look into it today. I did have some time to look at it, but when we talk about design standards, when the school came, they had to have a professional engineer review that parking lot, what the subgrade looked like, how much millings, so it was donated millings, and how much depth you would need to have that, and then chip sealing it because we require non-pervious pavement in your ordinances for non-parking or off-street parking. And so you have an ordinance that was, what I can find is originally passed in 1987. That was ordinance number 918, and it talks about your parking lot size and your dimensions and stall lengths and widths and stuff. And tonight we went up there and we measured, me and Nick, prior to the meeting, we went up there and you got 44 feet from the back of sidewalk to where the line of fence posts are up there, if anyone's been up there. It's about 44 feet of actual asphalt that's been chip sealed and then painted and striped. So it's 44 feet. And what I would ask is allow you, I do have the ordinance here, but there's some design standards and parking standards in there. But if you go in there and sit there and say, arbitrarily say, we're gonna extend 8 feet and it's not enough and they're starting all of a sudden have traffic accidents and stuff, did you create a hazard for parking? People are backing out and it wasn't any kind of design standard. So we have that in an ordinance, and it does have a table in there that council adopted, like I said, in 1987. It's actually from a study from 1970. So it's pretty outdated, but it's still in force. You still have it in your code. And so I do have that ordinance here tonight. If the mayor would like me to hand that out, but it does talk about that. So what I want to go to is the second page, and it's spoken about this table. It says, however, at a minimum, each off-street parking space shall conform to the size and layout standards set forth in the attached table of parking dimensions in feet, now mentioned and incorporated herein. Shall say all off-street parking on the street side of a property shall be paved with an all-weatherproof surface of concrete or asphalt. Off-street parking on the alley side of properties shall also be paved with all-weatherproof surface material unless the city, street, and alley committee and the building official gives an approval in writing of different surface material. That's still in your code. So we no longer have street and alley committee, but you still have it in your current code that you could, essentially a subcommittee of the council could give different specifications for your parking lot. Say it's not pervious pavement or concrete, you could do like a road-based material, as long as the council, essentially the council, subcommittee of the council would agree. But with that in the table is then it goes into a 45-degree stall, a 60-degree stall, a 75-degree stall, and then 90-degree stalls. And what your stall width would need to be in between the lines and your depths, so that it's safe for people to pull in. And so you see all these dimensions change depending on if it's at a 45-degree angle, a 60-degree angle, 75-degree angle, and a 90. So if you get up to a 90-degree stall right now, as it currently, they're supposed to be 9 feet wide, and the stall depth is supposed to be 18.5. If you have an aisle width at that 9-foot stall and underneath the 90-degree, you need 26 feet. So if you do the math, 26 plus 18.5, you are looking at 44.5, and we're right at 44 currently. So you're right at the max of a 90-degree stall making it safe at right now. You just, well, you're within a half a foot of it. You want to extend out, and I'm not sure what the plan is that's just for the stall. That doesn't include parking there. So if you want to do parking, maybe possibly another 8 to 9 feet over there, but it would have to be probably at a parallel parking on that side. You couldn't get, from my math, you can't get, unless you rearrange it all, you can't get parallel parking currently in there when you butt up against that pole. We went up and measured it, and it's right at, to the trees in that pole, it's about 60 feet total from the back of the curve to the pole. And so you're looking at about 14, 15 feet you could add on there. But will that give you enough for another stall over there if you try to go in at a 90 degree? I don't think it would. So I'm not sure what the plan would be as far as parking, but I think it would be possibly, and I'll give a copy to Dan. And this is what Dan's been pushing for, was to angle parking. He's presented the council and the mayor, I think, in the past of some kind of angle parking, and we want to look at that and make sure that design, if we did it and you did a one-way in and a one-way out, which is what you have, we possibly could make it work, but we want to make sure that we'd want to get in there and do it the right way. And so that's what I would ask, to have this information for you tonight. We can work with staff and we can look at it, come up with some figures of actually how far we would need to go. Try to sit there and source some millings like the parking lot was built with, and I think it was about 18 inches deep is what they excavated out and put in there. And then, of course, the school paid for chip sealing over top of it to seal those millings up. So they did all that, but they had I believe it was Engineering Inc. that designed that in the section. So we want to make sure that we don't create a parking lot that becomes full of potholes. We're in there patching it all the time because we didn't put enough structural base in there. As far as the trees, we went up there, they're flooded. We've got a lot of rain. That ground is saturated and soaking, and it's not going in. So around every one of those puddles up, or around the 3 remaining trees that are there, there's standing water there. Trees can't survive under standing water. They need oxygen to the roots, or actually air going to the roots system. So well-draining soil, it's not an ideal place to put the trees that we found out after we dug the holes and put it there. And so a few of the trees, the oak that is there, it does have buds coming off the base of it. So even though it's sitting in standing water right now, it does have some life to it. A lot of the trees are not coming on until right now in the last couple of weeks. So it might be interesting to see in the next few weeks how much damage there is. We also had this terrible February that is going to kill off a lot of trees. You'll see probably a lot more of that around town. Some of the trees that got winter damage because it got so cold. So cold we haven't seen it since I think the 20s or 30s. And so we may not see these young trees actually have any damage here until spring or later in the summer when we actually see what's alive and what's dead. So I would ask for a little more time to look at this over and see what we can do with stall depths and then changing the angle parking if the council so chooses to wish, and the mayor so chooses to wish staff to continue to look at that. So.
Councilmember Wilkie.
At one point, I heard a suggestion where you have the parking as it exists on the handicap side, okay, as it is right now, and completely do away with any parking on that fence side where one of those vehicles is, I mean, there's no way either one of them guys can back out of there if there's cars on either side of them without hitting each other. So the suggestion was on the fence side, which would be the ballpark side, there is no parking there whatsoever. I was under the impression that there had been no parking signs there that have, okay?
There's 3 of them.
Okay, but they're non-readable or non-enforceable or whatever. To me, that is the solution to that is to make sure that nobody parks on that side that interferes with the movement of the vehicles on the handicap side.
Yeah, and I can't speak to enforcement of that because I don't go out and do parking enforcement. But,
right, but
tonight there was 4 cars parked right in front of the no parking sign.
Yeah.
When we went up there. 4.
But if you make that known that is no parking period, no halftime, for 6 months, we're gonna allow it, and then the other 6 months, we're not because of the different kind of ball game event or whatever it is. That's even more difficult to enforce. People don't understand then what can I do, what can't I do, until I get the ticket in my hand. To me, it would be just as simple as just make that whole side there where that fence is at, no parking, period.
Councilmember Monsieur?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I went up there Saturday because they had a big event up here. And the whole row was parked along the fence, and it's posted, it's in plain sight. Any idiot can read it, it says no parking anytime, and they still park there. So the only way you're going to train these people is to just tow the vehicles. It'll take one time, and once they get towed and they get a big fine levied on them, or whatever the maximum fine would be, the word will start getting out that they can't park there. But they're gonna continue to park there if there's no enforcement done on it.
Councilmember Monsieur, did you happen to notice the plates on any of those vehicles, whether they were local or not?
They were mixed. I will comment though that every one of them had a handicap placard in them, because I looked at them and there were, I don't know how many cars were parked there, but every one had a handicap placard.
So the mayor asked us to look into this because he is an advocate for additional parking in the park. And so that's the whole thing, this parking lot. And I was here when it originally was put in, and because the stadium was going up and they needed off-street parking and they needed handicap spaces, they were using actually the high school parking lot for their off-street parking requirement. Because if you look in the ordinance, they have to have so many spaces per that. They were using that, and when they said, well, the stadium is primarily going to be used for football, soccer games, those are going to happen in the evenings. The parking lot will be empty at those times, and so that for that stadium, when it's full, they'll use the high school parking lot. What they didn't have as capability was for handicap spaces, they're supposed to be in close proximity to the entrance. That would lead me to believe, well, that'd be, if you go right across the entrance, that'd be on the practice football field. Well, they didn't want to give up the practice football field because they'll need javelin. Because you can't throw a javelin in artificial turf with an under-drain system. You're not going to do it. So they needed an area where you could still practice those events. Outside of that, that's still turf, still grass. So they didn't want to look at that because they're still going to need use of that. So they looked at the city and met with the mayor, and I think it was Josh Middleton, Scott Ryder, myself, and the mayor, and they approached the mayor about doing this alkali spot where there's high groundwater, and we had a hard time maintaining it and mowing it. It's just nothing grew there. And so they went in and they gave the previous mayor an ask, say, hey, if we can get donated millings from the council, which the council did do, donated the millings, we will build a parking lot for the general public, for everybody. But it will be primarily for the handicap accessible to enter the stadium. But it also allows handicap parking for the baseball games, the high school for choir concerts. I have parents that park there and go across the crosswalk and go in there. So it was for the general public well-being to have that handicap. Can there use more parking? Absolutely. I think anytime you can increase parking around there for the events and make it a shorter walk, it's more beneficial to the citizens. So we have, prior to this parking lot, you had all the way over to the the pool parking lot, and that was a gravel surfaced area. And back in 2006, I would say, we went in there and we put in millings and we rolled it. And then we had somebody come in when we did our chip sealing in town, and we had them shoot that with some asphalt and some small gravel. And it's held up since 2006. So we're 13 years into it, and it's still pretty good. We've got some holes that come out of it with winter damage and in the rain and stuff, but it's held up pretty good for 13 years of doing millings and chip sealing, in my opinion. So, but that was the original parking lot, and then everybody had a walk. I mean, then you had on-street parking. That was it. A lot of people use behind the school district property, the alleyway, I would call it, for the ball games and stuff, and they still do probably. They still park over there and they walk over there to the ball fields. They also use 6th Street East Sixth Street, and they walk up that main sidewalk to the ball fields, and they use that quite much as well. We are going to increase parking on the south side by doing diagonal parking. In the plans for the East Sixth Street project was to look at that and increase parking. And under the mayor's direction, we were told to try to increase parking on that side. So that gives us more parking on the south. If we can extend the parking lot on the north in the area essentially unsuitable, I would think that would be a wise choice. It would be up to the city council and staff and the mayor to try to come up with funds to try to do that, and then the workload on when we want to do that and try to accomplish that. And so just trying to get a time right and when we can go do that. I would propose maybe we could get something going later this fall if you so wish to fund that kind of improvement, and we can try to go out and look for millings and extend it, and then even that power pole there. It serves the sprinkler systems, and it serves the reader boards, I guess, the scoreboards for those ball fields is where that power comes in and what it feeds. And there's a light on, I believe, on the top of it. So that's a potential we could actually have that moved. I would have to talk to Northwest Energy and see where we could move it out of the way, or if we could move it at a different spot. We'd have to then rewire the timers and stuff for the sprinklers and stuff. So that's a possibility we could even move that. But there's plenty of area around those ball fields. They're little younger adults, I guess, or younger minors that are in those fields. So I'm not too worried about balls flying over the fence. It doesn't happen very often that they hit home runs. But when you consider doing that, any ball field you've ever been to, there's a chance that when you park there, you're going to catch a baseball. That's part of parking there and taking it. You might get a baseball through your windshield or your back window, but I think any ball field that you go to, that's a chance. Try to prevent it with netting, but it still happens. So anyway, so we can look forward to extending that if the mayor and the council so wish to do that.
Council President.
Thank you. With everything that was said then this evening, could we please have this back on the agenda for the last workshop in June so that it's not forgotten, and just expect a monthly at least update so that we can continue to be reminded of this project that may not get any real work done until the fall, but we want to keep it at least a monthly update so that we don't forget it.
And I have my police chief, Langby, here because I wanted him to be able to also address you so that you didn't think that he was over there going, you guys complain a lot and I'm not going to write any freaking tickets over there. And, I'm turning my back and ignoring it because that's not what's happening. That's why I asked if anybody had looked at plates, because that has some bearing on it. But if you'd like to go ahead and discuss from your perspective as far as parking in a no parking zone, which I'm very confident before too awful long that will be a parking zone under a different format than it is now, and will alleviate the whole problem. But if you could let them know what the challenges are today.
Any little nook and cranny they'll try. It's constant. It's constant every place you travel. The stadium. I'm always a big advocate of parking. That was one of the things we put up, probably the best stadium in the state. And we have no additional parking. So we have on-street parking, and sometimes we have the benefit of a parking lot. But given the totality of it, with over 100 buses in town, how many thousands of people came into town while school is in session. And a reminder, we've bunched most of our entire school district up in that one little bottleneck there. Speaking with the officers, they checked on it. They didn't write any citations for parking in a handicap spot without being properly stickered. They were active with the parking. The issue comes into, like I've mentioned before, parking ordinances on the way the state open to the public versus private property are different. It's like criminal enforcement on private parking lot. You have reckless, DUI, and no insurance. Outside of that, there's the handicap parking state statute. In my opinion, of when the parking lot first went in, with that parking spot behind there, is kind of like, well, try writing the prohibited places one, which we've constantly addressed. And, you know, you'll be out on patrol doing your thing. I've gone over and taken action. You know, it's just a constant thing. There's no one pill that's going to clean it all up. It's constant. You go in law enforcement, maybe I can make the analogy here, but let's say working DEAs, you worked it hard, you did the best you can, you take one off, another one comes in. So if the standard's never going to be 100%, but what it's going to be if you weren't there. So we continue to make it an issue, put it on where the priority is at the time. And I wasn't here last week, I was off as well, but speaking with the officers, they addressed it, they're aware of it, and for as big as the event it was, it sounded like it went pretty smoothly actually. But it's a process.
Any questions for Police Chief Langley on the parking issue over there? Council Vice President McGee?
Yeah, so is it my understanding then that those no parking signs that exist on that side of the, which I guess is the south side of the parking lot, are not enforceable?
I'm not saying that. What we've done in the past with the no parking signs up, we all agree, it's my opinion too, that when you park there, parallel park behind it, you've rendered that handicap parking area unusable. Yep. To me, it's the same if you're blocking it out, because that comes the question: does the statute only apply if you're inside the lines, or with that width? I think you could argue that, and you could, ultimately, when you have these decisions, it gets boiled down to what does the jury or peers say or the judge say. So at the time, I went to the then city attorney and said, "This is what I'm looking at. I don't know that anything specifically applies here." At that time, the suggestion was go with prohibited place. And to my best of my knowledge, it was never challenged. So, that's really the litmus test there as to whether it's legal or not. But ultimately, let's jump over to Walmart. Let's make a Walmart. The only parking there that I could enforce is that handicap parking. I can't do anything with the fire zone. I can't do anything with the signs they put up on the one side said prohibited parking, don't park here. We can't enforce that. That's the property owners, and the property owner the only one has the standing to say we're going to tow that vehicle. And my suggestion to all property owners, let's say you have two businesses competing, parking, so they have patrons from one going to the other, is, anytime you park on private property, you may get towed. It's their property. But from a legal standpoint, liability standpoint, I would strongly suggest having that posted. And, they took it because even out on the street, we're limited to the way of the state, open to the public, and it's interfering with traffic. To be able to go in and take that person's property, some significant property.
Councilmember Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, if I understand you correctly, you don't want to write those cars that are parked along that fence because you don't know if it's legal or not?
No, I've written them before. I wrote when I did it. I wrote a lot more warnings. Well, one, because it was newer. Two, it's like the track event. It's they only have their child in this little league for a few years, and it kind of rotates out. Maybe an SRO analogy is that you have your freshmen, sophomores, and then you finally get them trained and they graduate and go off, and you start all over again. Simply because it's the same color, and most people are compliant. But there again, it's that rotating issue, and after a while, you give warnings. And then, you have to write your citations. As far as I know, I know that I don't know if there was any that were dismissed or it was ever tested, but that was the best information I had at the time with the prohibited place. I'm just trying to give all the factors. And obviously proper signage is the only thing that makes it enforceable. You know, if it was put to it, looking at the statute, I don't know that it's terribly clear whether on private property you could do with a prohibited place parking or not. Most parking has to do with ways of the state open to the public.
Is a school property considered private property?
If it's not where the state open to the public, a roadway, or, you know, a public roadway, an alley, something like that, generally it's, and I say private property in the sense that even like we're a government entity, taxpayer funded, it basically comes down to somebody managing that land. And if it were true public property, you know, they could come pitch a tent right here and live here because, well, it's open for public use. So public property, private property, public property, because it's school district or government run, is a bit of a misnomer. I think it gets, in the popular vernacular, gets used. We all understand what we're talking about when it really comes down to it. There are authorities that can dictate the usage and the time of usage and the style of usage. So when I talk about public right away where the street's open, we can manage it, versus private, that's what I'm referring to. There's an entity there that can just say, I don't want this here, and take it off.
So is that a yes or a no for the school? Do you consider it public or do you consider it private?
I would consider it private. The good analogy for, or better answer maybe is, if the high school is truly public property, I couldn't tell anybody they couldn't be there at any time. You know, anybody could just stroll in on the property, do whatever they want, set up a tent, if it was truly public land.
But yet taxes are the only thing that supports the school.
Yep. But the school district is entrusted with the management and ownership of that property. So if it were truly public land, like I said, Joe Blow, child predator could be walking up and down the halls and we couldn't say boo, which obviously is not true.
Councilmember Stokes.
That parking lot, I was under the impression is city property.
From what I've seen, I don't know. It's still city property, so in a sense, it would be our private. You know,
It can be enforced, no parking along there.
Well, there again, it's not a way of the state open to the public. So instead of getting back in between what's public, private, let's fall back to what's a way of the state open to the public. Is a public right of way. Is that clear?
Absolutely not.
No?
Like mine.
So if it were truly open to where you could do anything on the street, you wouldn't be able to close that park down at midnight and say you can't be there. So my understanding is it's the city's property and the school had a handshake deal and the school put their stuff on there.
Go ahead, Kurt.
The one thing, when we do subdivisions and rights of way, so when you subdivide land, you make a declaration. The property owner has, I'll just give you an example, Iron Horse. He owns all that property. When he files a final plat, the council accepts that and we annex it. Within the street right of way, there's a dedication, a little thing off to the side of that plat that says this dedication is open to the public forever. So it's giving to local governing jurisdiction to oversee, which would be the city council. But like Officer or Chief Langby said, it has then become ways and means for the public for any hour and any day to go through that. Whereas the parkland was dedicated through a parkland dedication, but the city council solely controls that and you can set your rules and regulations for your parks. So in that park, you have a regulation for the park closed at midnight. Kids Kingdom, you have it closed at the Kids Kingdom Playground, you close that at dusk. It used to be open until midnight, and then we had a bunch of vandalism, so we came back to the council and the park board, and we worked and said, okay, there's no reason for them to be in playgrounds after dark. So then we had to put in lights and cameras. But so you have rules and regulations on how you deal with your parks. Same thing with Riverside Park and what you want to do down there. So the council sets rules and regulations for your parks, and this happens to be on parkland dedication. But we also have a parking lot on it. So how you set your rules and regulations for allowing parking and how it is enforced would probably be different. I would agree with Chief Langley that it's probably different. It's still public property, but it's treated not as a public right of way that's dedicated to the public. Instead, that parkland is dedicated to the public for use forever as far as parkland, but in a different way. It's for recreation and different way of staying for vehicle traffic. It's for enjoyment of the public that live in that neighborhood, or actually to anyone come and use that park. And then you set the hours when that enjoyment can be done. And so right now it's midnight, and then it opens back up at, I think it's 6 a.m. I can't remember the ordinance exactly, but I think it's 6 a.m. So does that clear it up a little bit better?
I just wonder why we can't put a sign that says no parking.
You get 3 of them. There's 3 of them there. Yeah. So
we can't get
Yeah. Prohibited places falls under, there's a long list, fire hydrants, it lists it all out. I don't know that specifically addresses a parking lot. So I have written that citation as a patrolman in there. It's never been tested and told me that, no, it doesn't fall within there. So if we were, what I would ask is just there's quite a few ordinances that have to be gone through. They're old, and that would be one of the things that we need to address, maybe more specifically, because as we all know in law, there's not necessarily a lot of black and white answers. There's black over here, white over here, and where we work is in the gray. So if we establish it, no parking, we should probably at the same time make that clear. If it's not exactly clear, and we'll enforce it. I'll enforce it that way if the sign goes up right now, because that's what we've done in the past. It was the last legal counsel that I had, that they felt that prohibited place city ordinance would work.
Councilmember Monsieur, did you still have a question?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Example of what Kurt was talking about is the city parks close at 10 o'clock, yet the sidewalks, you can still use those.
Yeah.
If I'm not, and that's a prime example where you have a gray area because people think you can't even walk through the city parks after 10 o'clock, and that's not true.
If you're on a public easement, the sidewalk, then that's, absolutely not. It's just the park area that's regulated by the city.
Thank you.
So I think what it boils down to is if we create parking and we look at our ordinances in the parks where we have parking in parks and work out some of those issues with staff, including the chief of police, we can probably solve all of those problems and provide for access for people, and access that's easy to egress and ingress from. And then we'll go on to the next parking issue where we need to look at parking. Mr. Koch, would you like to speak?
I would. Okay. Council and Mayor, thank you. I'm really happy that we made the agenda. It's been 3 years, and last week when I read the resolution, it said that Emily introduced it, so I asked her to specifically help me, and she did an awesome job. She went out and looked, wrote a great letter. I want to go back to this person that wants to haul everybody away.
No, excuse me?
Excuse me.
Address me,
we're
please.
talking here, the human part of it. These boys start here, and the parents and the grandparents and the people want to go to the park that they pay taxes for and watch their kids play. I don't want to haul them off. I started this 3 years ago with maybe if we changed the angle of it, then people could get in and out and they could park parallel on the opposite side. They don't want to park parallel. They want to park perpendicular. The wind's blowing, it's cold, it's raining. They want to watch their little boy grow up. That's the human part of it. And I know that we have regulations that we have to deal with as far as, the distance between them, et cetera. I use 8 or 10 foot just to make sure that we could back out. You go to parking lots where they are back to back, you have to park out. They're a lot easier to get out if they're on a bit of an angle. And that's what I put forth in the first place, is to make it open to all of us that use the park. I don't want the school to not have a parking area, and I don't want to abuse anybody by hauling them off. I went to the Friday, I hung my placard and I drove through there. And you're right, it was completely, totally full. Every 17 lot, every one of them, as far as I know, had a placard hanging. I saw on the backside 2 of them that didn't have one. The next day I went up there, they were so full, they were even backed up into the little building over there and down the side. And as far as I know, they all had placards. That's not the point. The point is the school needs it. We pay taxes for the school. We pay taxes for the park. We need more space for the parents, the grandparents, the people that come from Columbus or Huntley or whatever. They don't know that they're going to get towed off if they pull in there and park. Most of them don't even see the sign. When I finally brought this to everybody 3 years ago, there was no sign telling the people that this is handicapped only. And I got into it with the council, and Heidi bought a sign. I offered to pay for the other sign. 2 ways to get in here now. She gave me my money back, but anyway, the point is, open it up for the public. That's what it's for. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Dan. Obviously, this is something that will follow the request from Council President Eaton to put this back on the agenda so that we'll keep it running on the agenda until we solve this problem. I think it's an issue that's solvable. There is a solution, and it's not an expensive solution, and it's a solution that we can tackle and make an improvement for a lot of people in a lot of people's lives. So I think I'm going to make it my charge to continue going forward. I hope the council will oblige me and engage in seeing it to its end, and then we will work on the next parking issue, because we have a parking problem in this city, and there's no shortage of parking issues to address, and there never will be, but we'll continue to take those on one at a time and try to find solutions that are reasonable and obtainable, that we can provide for the residents of the city and those from outside the city that we invite here to come and watch those especially sporting events over at the school. And we're a community that depends on those people to come in and spend some money and eat here and enjoy themselves and go home and hopefully come back again and do it all over again. So, are there any other questions on this, Council Vice President McGee?
Yes, sir. I'm wondering why we're kicking the can down the road even a short distance. Our city works director asked for more time, and I think he needs that in order to cultivate something. But can't we have a determination that we will have a plan by a certain date, or within 90 days or 120 or whatever, the city works director needs to be able to work on this? Because obviously it's not going to go away, and we didn't even begin to cover the parking improvements we talked about are not even going to be capable of being utilized over the 4th of July. They never are. You know, those streets are closed and other things take place there, you know, and stuff like that, which is not the important part of this issue. The important part of this issue is we have obviously a poorly designed situation that we were handed to, that the city agreed to, that has to stay under the city auspice because it's dedicated park, but there's area there that can expand. Obviously, there's going to be some expense associated with that, especially if we start moving light poles and other things or power sources, you know, for that. Can't we come up with a plan A, B, and C in the next 90 days, 120 days for the council to look at?
I'm sure we'll have it well within 120 days.
Well,
I have staff they're going to
okay.
produce something for us to look at.
Okay.
And there are base considerations, as we discussed, millings that we need to find. So we're going to have to find some of those things that we need to put down, but we'll accomplish it.
So and the only reason I bring that up, Mr. Mayor, is because my concern is I've seen so many times sitting behind in this chair, you know, that it's talk and never action. You know, it's we don't get that. If you tell me there's a time and it's less than 120 days that the council is going to have some things to decide about it, I'm fine with that, you know. But if this time next year we're still talking about this situation, you know, after Mr. Koch's been 3 years bringing it up to the council, you know, I'm wondering why we weren't here 3 years ago, you know. It's a legitimate question, I think, and but we're here today. We obviously have a scope of the problem now, you know. Can we figure out at least some kind of viable solution? What I would like to know, really like to know, is whatever solution we come up with, what kind of new problems is that going to create? You know, and is anything that's going to be posted there going to be enforceable at that time, or are we going to take care of all of it at the same time? Because it seems like we already did this once, and we created a situation that is not tenable, and I want to know if you know, whatever new plan's got, I want to know what kind of anticipated problems that plan is going to have as well.
Yeah, and I would have to agree with you that we would be remiss in our duties to produce a plan that was incomplete or not well thought through. That won't be the case, and I don't know how many things I talked to the council about that I've dropped, kicked down the road and not bothered to bring back, but my administration will make sure that we follow through on these things that are important to the community, and we find a solution, and then we will implement it. You can guarantee that. We will come up with a good solution. We will bring that to council through the park board, and that will be vetted, and then we will implement it. I don't think it's an issue of funding. We have some parking money that we can utilize. It's a matter of putting it all together and make sure we've got a good plan. Let's get park board on board to take a look at that and give us their best recommendation. And then when you signify that you're ready to spend some money to put that in place, we'll put her in place and get her done. I don't know if we can be done this year. I would like to see it done or at least started, but I guarantee you we'll have something, a solution done over there by this time next year. So, the question, Councilmember Wilkie.
Yes, Chief Langley kind of mentioned that there were some ordinances that needed to be tweaked. Is there any way in your limited time of in your day that you could share with us some of those ordinances that you believe need to be tweaked and what you believe the tweak should be?
Well, we've been bringing it up and working on it. Last 2 months have been kind of tough getting the committee together, but absolutely. Maybe a perusal of where we could start right now is with parking, because that's the issue, and that would be my suggestion, that we address this we come up with a plan, make sure, get the legal opinion, tweak anything in parking we need to, and that's what a great jumping off spot. Eventually, and my list of things I'm trying to knock off is the drudgery work of sitting down, going through and seeing what needs to be updated. Things that, you know, weren't relevant 40, 50 years ago, you know, when some of them were in there. And we have to become compliant with MCA. And that's probably one of the things where city ordinances fall behind is a lot of them mask MCA, you know, and then through various reasons, court rulings or whatnot, may not be enforceable. So just some cleanup work, the drudgery, but absolutely that is on the list and long needed. So
Okay. It just would give us kind of a jumping off point as to what you see as a concern of the ability to enforce it or whatever. Is it in the court that's not enforcing it properly or whatever? But it would give us an opportunity to kind of see where you're coming from, so then we can look at it and say, okay, yeah, we can see where that's a problem. And then maybe between us, we can figure out a way to tweak it, fix it.
And parking and barking are the two hot buttons that I seem to come up here with the most, which is a good thing. Why not address that, you know, and start there. So every trip needs a starting point, so let's do that.
Thank you.
Yep.
Now, we'll have further discussion on some of the ordinance issues, parking ordinance from 1987, from a study conducted in 1971 that obviously is out of date. And then some. But we're a small community. We have a small staff. It requires the boards, the committees, to try to give members work to take home, to work on, to spend as much time as you can. I know when we were working on the original safety levy that we took out to the voters, we all had our homework. We all worked lots of hours outside of the committee, bringing stuff back to the committee. And that's what it's going to take. It's going to take a lot of extra work on all of our parts. We're a city that's got a lot of things going on, a lot of challenges, a lot of growth issues. The staff is busy, and we're not in the position to double our staff, unfortunately. So it's going to take all of us, and I throw myself in there. I will work outside of being in this room as hard as I can and as many hours as I can to help you. And I hope if you need help that you ask me what you need, and I will try to do that, put that effort in to help you as well. So together we can do it. It's just a matter of being careful and picking our battles and starting where we need to start and getting one thing looked at, addressed, get a solution, and then move on to the next one at a time, so that we don't get to that point where we're not getting anything done because we're not doing or directing our attention to any one challenge, and we're not focused. That would be my suggestion, and I'm here to help. So, is there any other questions on the parking issue tonight? With that, we will move on to other items. Under other items, we have the review of the draft council agenda for next Tuesday. Is there any questions on the council agenda? I went through it myself, looked at it, looked like it was verbatim what we've got that we discussed tonight. Attendance at the upcoming council meeting. Anybody not going to be able to make next week's meeting? Councilmember Sparks, anybody else? We'll miss you, but the rest of these guys, the rest of the council will. I know they understand your passion, at least on a couple of these issues that are coming up. So hopefully they will take care of you there and follow through. Any announcements anybody have for the council? Councilmember Sparks? I have nothing. Councilmember Herr?
I have nothing.
Councilmember Wilkie?
I have nothing, sir. Thank you.
Councilmember Monsieur?
No, sir. Not at this time.
It's up to the east side of the table. Councilmember Closey.
I have nothing, thank you, sir.
Councilmember Stokes.
Nothing.
Council Vice President McGee.
I've said plenty. I have nothing else. Thank you.
Pinning my hopes on the Council President. Council President Eaton.
I have nothing.
Well, with that, we're adjourned. Have a good night.